I'm giving every biome a custom stronghold variant, updating this classic structure with new features and mechanics like trial spawners, custom traps, and unique end portals. 4 biome strongholds have now been completed and released, but there are plenty more to create based on your input as I work to make the process of following your Eyes of Ender new and exciting each and every time. If you haven't heard already, the Biome Strongholds data pack has been released and features strongholds for the desert, ocean, jungle, and snowy biome types. But since there are still a lot of biomes that the vanilla stronghold still spawns in, I want to make sure that I'm not just rehashing the same things. As I continue to add new biome strongholds to the pack, I want to take the lessons learned from the previous biomes as well as take things in new directions. Basically, every stronghold should feel special. Now, of course, in order for all of these custom strongholds to still feel like strongholds and deliver on the intent of the structure, they are going to have some similarities. For example, of course, they're always going to have a starting staircase. This is technically the start of the structure from which the rest of the stronghold branches out from. And of course, they're always going to have a single portal room. Because strongholds are legacy structures, they don't technically use the same technology that we use to make custom structures, and so they're able to cheat a little bit, which is what allows them to have a single end portal in a semi-random location for every stronghold. We have to cheat ourselves a little bit, but in a very different way in order to replicate this behavior. But thankfully, now with 4 strongholds under my belt, I've gotten pretty good at it. Now, although these all need to feel like strongholds, they obviously should be more than just a reskin. Every stronghold is going to have not only a different block palette, but also a very different design to its layout. The jungle stronghold, for example, features very few hallways and is instead designed and made up of many different kinds of rooms that are all strung together in similar doorways and configurations. And this is very different from something like the desert stronghold, which is mostly hallways that then adjoin to some rooms. Now, regardless of the layout and which stronghold you travel to, it is still important that the navigation to the portal room is learnable, but still complicated. It shouldn't be a straight and direct path to find the portal room, but there should be enough consistency that a player could learn how the different pieces are fitted together and eventually figure out how to travel from the starting staircase to the portal room consistently. And lastly, since the goal of this project is to update the stronghold to modern Minecraft, we want to include some modern mechanics. This includes new vanilla features like the trial spawners and trial vaults, which populate all the strongholds, as well as adding new data pack functionality that isn't necessarily vanilla, such as secret doors or special keys that are required to find the portal room. So with all these goals in mind, let's continue to add to the Biome Strongholds data pack with the next structure, the Swamp Stronghold. So, as you can see, I've had to lean a little bit more towards the mangrove swamp, but this is going to spawn in both swamps and mangrove swamps. We're using packed mud for the walls, muddy mangrove roots for the ceiling, because I think they create a nice contrast, and then we're using mud for the floors, which I hope will be really interesting to kind of walk on, a little bit different than some of the other stronghold floors have had. You'll notice inside as well right away that we have short grass here on the floor, as well as cave vines that are growing from the ceiling. And this is just to add a little bit of additional pops of color to help break up the otherwise very brown and kind of drab color palette that we're working with. This should add a very nice pop of green. Right now, the entire floor is covered with these short grass, entire ceiling covered with cave vines, but when this structure gets generated, we're going to use a processor to replace the majority of these with air, so that there's only a fairly sparse amount of grass and even less of the cave vines. Similarly, we'll use a processor to change some of the mud into water, some of the mud bricks into rooted dirt, and so on. Again, just to add a little bit of variety to the blocks as you're walking through. This right here is the starting staircase. So just like the vanilla stronghold, this swamp stronghold is going to start from this structure. And then this jigsaw block right here is going to generate the first piece from which all of the rest of the stronghold will branch out from. I've gone ahead and made all of the variants of hallways that I'm planning on using, especially because this stronghold I'm thinking isn't going to have a lot of hallways. So we have this basic one here, but then this decorated one is using bricks for the lower layer here to add a bit of a trim, some terracotta up for the top trim, and then we have these exposed copper bulbs to add some lighting. And then, like all of the biome strongholds, we have some vertical staircases that let out to the left or to the right, as well as a downward horizontal staircase that is very similar to what you might find in the vanilla stronghold. So with the basics out of the way, let's talk about the Swamp Stronghold's complexes. Complexes are the name that I've given to a part of a jigsaw structure that is meant to represent or kind of look like several smaller pieces, or at least not meant to look like one very large piece from which other rooms or complexes can branch out from these other jigsaw blocks. And this is to help serve towards that complicated navigation goal. The idea is that a player won't be able to tell if they're traveling through a complex, through a single very large room, rather than a collection of smaller rooms or hallways. And so they won't necessarily know where in the stronghold they are, so that they are still trying to search for that end portal. But they are also designed with some consistency so that if you take the time to learn where the complexes begin and end, then you can kind of use that to help figure out about where you are relative to that starting staircase. The complex for the Swamp Stronghold looks a little bit broken, and that's because for this I wanted to make a really cool and semi-dynamic maze system. And to do this, I have the basic template here as the jigsaw structure that gets placed first, and then we have a jigsaw block down here in the middle that places the adjoining hallways to connect all of the individual cells into a functioning maze. So this here is the first piece of the complex that's going to get placed. This is what has the jigsaw blocks that connect to the previous complex or generate the next one. And then a jigsaw block inside of this is going to generate the actual maze on top of it. The reason I've done it this way is to help simplify all of the varieties of complex that I want to have, because the complexes are also necessary in order to ensure that we always get exactly one end portal. This jigsaw block here I've placed an emerald block in front of, and that is to represent that this is a possible entrance into this complex. When the starting staircase generates a complex piece, this is one of the jigsaw blocks that it is allowed to select as the entrance that connects to it. This jigsaw block right here has a diamond block in front of it, and that represents that the complex that this generates next is going to be what's considered a main path complex, just like this first one here. The difference between a main path complex and a side path complex, which is what's going to generate from the green jigsaw block that does not get selected as the entrance, is that the main path complex will have a jigsaw block that can generate another main path complex on the way to eventually the portal room. Whereas a side path complex, a complex that does not have a diamond block in front of it, is going to generate more complexes or rooms, but will never be able to generate a portal room along that branch. But of course, if we do just that, then we have two possible entrances, but only one possible location that the end portal could be generating from, one branch that it could follow. And so if you just learn this complex, then you will very easily be able to find your way over to the end portal. And so we have multiple variants of the same complex with the jigsaw shuffled around so that the path to the end portal is not always in the same place. Each of these stacks here represents a different variant of the same complex, with that last stack being used just for the side path complexes. The hallways and the staircases function on a similar system. They also need to keep track. If a complex generates a staircase or a hallway, it needs to remember that the next complex that it generates needs to be a main path or a side path complex. And so we have the same kind of variance here. And since these ones don't need to generate mazes, they are just completely empty. We have structure voids inside of them, and then the actual structure part will be placed on top, rather than like the maze where we have to generate the cells first and then the maze on top of it. This is a very basic start to the stronghold, but let's make sure that everything is working the way I expect it to. Okay, we're spread out pretty wide, but not too huge right now. I think this is good. Obviously, these mazes are only a single level, and so we end up with a very flat stronghold. That's something that I expect will probably change shortly. But obviously we have our starting staircase here that stands out quite well, and that leads directly into one of these mazes. Let's drop on down in. And here we can see the processor at work. So of course we're replacing most of the short grass with air, but some of them are getting replaced with brown mushrooms and red mushrooms, and some of the mud is getting replaced with mycelium as well as water. This is because the Swamp Stronghold is also going to spawn in the Mushroom Fields biome. I've been getting a lot of comments about people that are very excited to see a Mushroom Field Stronghold, but since this is only a single biome, I worry that making an entire stronghold for it would make it just really hard for players to ever experience that stronghold. And so I found that it's probably going to be better to group it with something else, and the Swamp Stronghold feels like the closest cousin. I'll make sure later that some of the rooms in particular are much more geared towards mycelium and mushrooms and the Mushroom Fields biome, but at least for the general vibe of the stronghold, I feel like this is working really well. Some of the mud bricks are getting replaced with packed mud and rooted dirt just to kind of break it up a little bit, and some of the muddy mangrove roots on the ceiling are getting replaced with moss blocks. I've also made some of the cave vines have glowberries on them to help light up the stronghold some, since lighting doesn't really matter for the trial spawners. Walking around inside this maze is looking pretty nice. We obviously have a staircase over here that will take us to another maze. But so far, of course, these mazes are completely empty. There's a lot breaking up the visuals, but there isn't a lot to do as you're exploring here. That's something we'll need to improve by filling it up with things to do. Now, to make sure the complex system is actually working the way it's intended, we can follow from the starting staircase, go into this first main path complex. This is looking like it's probably a side path complex that's generating out from it, which makes sense. This right over here is going to be intended to generate a room, but we don't have any yet, so of course it has nothing. Which means this is the only entrance left that must be going to a main path complex, which means since that's a complex, this right here is where the portal room ought to be spawning. But of course, we don't have a portal room right now, and so it's just generating a bunch of staircases because that's all it can think to do, until eventually it just runs out of space. But that does confirm that the complex system is working, and I'm pretty happy with the foundations that we've laid here. So the next step is definitely going to be filling up the interior of the mazes, and also helping to make the whole stronghold a little bit more vertical. Probably by making complexes that are multiple mazes stacked on top of each other. Let's start with the new decorative pieces that are going to be inside all of these maze complexes. I've added jigsaw blocks to the interior walls of all the mazes. These are separate from the jigsaw blocks that will eventually spawn the spawners and the loot that could fill these up, but they're facing the walls. They're going to have a chance to generate these pieces that'll create basically little indents in the walls, some of which are purely decorative, like this torch that has a little bit of a shelf below it. But I also have all the decorated pots that have become such a staple of exploring these biome strongholds. I've also added a cauldron that'll sort of pay homage to the fact that witches can't live in swamps. The hope is that these will add just a little bit more visual variety to the walls of the mazes as you explore the stronghold. Obviously, they're primarily cosmetic. Most of the things to do as you explore the complexes is going to come from the trial spawners once we add those. But I think at least for now, this is a nice start. I've also designed 2 more mazes to go along with the 2 that we already have, and since these can all be rotated inside of the complex, this functionally makes almost like 16 different variations of mazes that you could find on each floor of a complex. And then speaking of each floor, I've made a second complex style that is 2 layers of mazes tall. So we have a jigsaw block here for the top layer, and then if we come down here, there's another one for the bottom layer. We once again have 3 different variants, 3 different configurations of all the jigsaw blocks to help obscure which entrance or exit is going to lead to the portal room. And this is making me really glad that I designed the mazes the way that I did with all these interlocking cells, because it makes handling these staircases between the layers way easier. As it stands, regardless of the variant of complex, the staircase is always going to be in the same place relative to all of the entrances and exits. So for example, in this variant, if we come through this entrance here, if this is selected as the start of this complex, then we can pass through here, and assuming there isn't a wall here, go through this hallway and get the staircase to the next floor of this particular complex. But of course, it's not simply a matter of going up and down. Sometimes the portal room might be on a higher level than you started from, especially depending on whether you actually started from the starting staircase or if you found the stronghold through a different access point, such as being connected to a cave. So you'll need to thoroughly explore each level of each complex, each maze individually, but thankfully that should be made easier by the fact that they are so uniform in size. So this will hopefully help make the stronghold much more varied internally and also help spread it out a lot more, especially vertically, thanks to the taller complexes. But before we test these, I think the next thing that I'd like to work on is the portal room so that we have something a little bit nicer to look at than a big old tower of staircases. If you're enjoying the video, please remember to like and subscribe. I make all kinds of content related to custom structures and world gens that I'm excited to share with you. If you'd like to play with the Biome Strongholds data pack, it's available for free on Planet Minecraft, Modern, and Smith. However, the Swamp Stronghold won't be added until my patrons have had a chance to playtest with it in early access. So if you're excited to play with the Swamp Stronghold specifically, please consider joining my Patreon. For this portal room, I've gone with a little bit more of an understated design, at least for the exterior. However, going inside, I am pretty proud of it. This jigsaw block is going to connect to that previous complex or staircase if necessary, and then we enter into the portal room proper. As usual, I've included the pool of lava that is consistent with the lava that generates below the end portal in the vanilla stronghold, just as that additional visual motif or indicator that yes, this is indeed the end portal room. But the floor of the room is flooded with water, and these lily pads are going to be partially removed with a processor. We have these awesome mangrove trees that are kind of growing out of this water, and then a couple of staircases that go up to these raised platforms at the front and back of the room. Now, if this is your first Biome Stronghold video, you may be wondering why the end portal frames are all scattered around the room like this, and we have the normal end portal frame shape, but made of bedrock here in the middle. Of course, just filling 12 end portal frames with Eyes of Ender is not what spawns an end portal. They are specifically tied to this particular shape, and so if they're scattered around the room like this, how are we supposed to get an end portal? And the answer is just with data pack functions. I'm going to add the behavior later so that if you place all 12 of the Eyes of Ender in these end portal frames, then an end portal will generate in this bedrock frame here in the middle, just like all of the other Biome Strongholds. The reason for this is, in theory, it makes the process of filling the Eyes of Ender, filling all the end portal frames, and spawning the end portal much more grandiose of a process. It really makes it feel like you are building towards something, and oftentimes requires a lot of exploration of the portal room. In this case, for example, we have the end portal frame right here facing right in front of the actual bedrock frame, so that if you do want to watch the end portal spawn as you place the last eye, you have that option. And we also have the 3 up here. But the other 8 end portal frames are underneath all these mangrove roots. You'll have to wade through the water and in some cases break through some of the roots in order to actually access the frames. Not necessarily hidden, but just a little cooler of a design as you try and fill the end portal. Of course, the end portal room is not without protection. This jigsaw block right here is going to generate a boss spawner once we decide what the sort of boss mob of the stronghold is. And then there's also a jigsaw block back here that's going to have a chance to generate any old spawner. We'll worry about making the end portal actually spawn later. For now, let's get this into a test world and make sure both this and those increased maze complexes are working the way we want. Nice, this is feeling a lot more spread out both horizontally and vertically. Should be pretty coincidental that we kind of got these 4 or 3 distinct wings, but I don't think it's a problem regardless. We have the starting staircase that goes into a complex here. It looks like it is a medium complex. We've got some side paths off in those directions, but we can tell here that this is the main path complex because the portal room then gets connected directly to that. And thankfully, the portal room is not getting in the way of a hallway generating from this connection or vice versa. Before we check out the portal room, let's come in here and see what the interior is looking like with these decorations. We have a nice torch over there, a cauldron at the end of this hallway where we've got a cool fork in the road. Some pillars are adding a little bit of variety over here. I do want to see if we can find that staircase. Looks like this is it. Yep, cool. And that means now I have a better understanding of where I am relative to other complexes. So for example, I know that as I pass through into here, this must be a separate complex from the one I was just in. But let's come back down these stairs and make sure they're connecting correctly. Great. And now we're in a totally different maze. Where that was a fully open hallway, it's now a dead end, and we have to continue this way. Again, once we have spawners and loot, there's going to be a lot more to do in these mazes, but I do really like that these hallways are 5 wide instead of the usual 3 like all the other biome strongholds. It's another mark in the Swamp Stronghold's favor for standing apart from the other strongholds and being a little bit more than just a reskin, and it's hopefully going to allow for more interesting and dynamic battling, especially with all of these additional kind of indents with the cauldrons and torches and things. Let's make our way down this staircase here, which has a little bit of water flooding into it. Should add a little bit more kind of dynamic excitement to the exploration of the stronghold, and make our way to the portal room. The lily pads are getting removed very nicely, so there are still some nice spots to land on. It's still very clear that this is quite swampy and not just a random puddle of water. And there's no issue jumping up from the water onto these stairs to get to these upper layers here. The end portal room is using a processor that makes each end portal frame have a 10% chance of being filled with an Eye of Ender, just like the vanilla stronghold. We just happened to get unlucky here. Looks like all of these portal frames are empty. So the portal room is generating correctly, and we have this beautiful connection to the previous complex, a very fluid transition from the maze into the portal room that hopefully we can maintain for all of the rooms. But exploring these larger complexes has really made it clear that they are still very boring. The addition of the wall decorations adds some nice visual variety, but I really think that I'm going to break pattern here and make these spawners and loot next, because I'm tired of walking through all these mazes with nothing to do. Much of the loot that we have for the Swamp Stronghold is very similar to what we've seen from all the previous biome strongholds. Got a pile of gold, a chest that's going to have a pretty standard loot table, some decorated pots, as well as the 2 vaults, both regular and ominous. Now, when it comes to the spawners, and more specifically the mobs that they spawn, I've had a little bit more fun in changing things up than I've done in some of the previous strongholds. First up, the most common mob that you're going to encounter here is the sort of mossy zombie or swamp zombie. It has an azalea bush on its head, and it's holding these red and brown mushrooms that let it, when it hits you, poison you. It'll only be for a few seconds, I think between 2 and 3 as I recall, so it's not going to deal a ton of damage, but if you get cornered, you're going to be taking quite consistent damage, especially as it continues to hit you with its normal melee attack. I'm making the zombies able to do this by enchanting the mushrooms they're holding with a new custom enchantment called Venomous. They just have Venomous 1, but the enchantment goes up to 3, with each level increasing the duration and the potency of the effect that is given to the damaged entity. The purpose of this is to set them apart from some of the other strongholds that have featured variants of the zombie, like Husks or the custom ice zombie from the Snowy Stronghold, and to help them fit in better with the Bogged, which is one of the other mobs that spawns here in the Swamp Stronghold. In fact, during Ominous Trials, the Bogged that spawn here are going to have swords instead of bows, but those swords are still going to be enchanted with Venomous. So, functionally, the mechanical identity of the Swamp Stronghold will be poison. We also have slimes here, which work very similarly to the slimes that I made for the Ocean Stronghold. This looks like a small-ish or medium-ish slime, but it's actually a little bit larger than it looks, and that's to allow it to be able to deal damage when it hits you. And that of course does mean as well that it's going to split apart into these smaller slimes, but these ones of course won't deal damage. In continuing with the swamp zombies and the pattern set by the Bogged, if you have a slime that spawns during an ominous trial though, it is going to deal you poison, and this is once again done thanks to a venomous enchantment that it is holding on the item. But of course, the smaller slimes that spawn from it will not be venomous, since that's not something that carries over when the slime splits. Now, each biome stronghold also features a so-called boss mob, which isn't necessarily intended to be a true boss or even a mini-boss. It's just supposed to be a somewhat stronger mob that can fill some of the more loot-heavy rooms, such as the portal room. Up to now, I've avoided making trial spawners for my strongholds that spawn illagers, because I feel like these are not quite the same as the monsters that you would expect to have in spawners. But here for the Swamp Stronghold, I feel like I have to make an exception for the Witch. Now, witches are a technically strong mob in that they have a lot of health, and their ability to drink health potions can make them a bit slow or difficult to kill. Plus, because they can throw potions of poison and harming, this adds some additional difficulty to them, especially if you're fighting them at range. However, once you are able to get up close, as long as you're able to knock them into a corner, you can outpace their ability to heal themselves, and they will prioritize trying to heal themselves over throwing potions at you. So I've added a little bit of oomph to these witches to hopefully make them just a little bit more dynamic to fight. Now, when you hit a witch that is spawned from a Biome Strongholds trial spawner, it's going to teleport behind you after you hit it. This will hopefully give it an opportunity to run away as it heals itself, or otherwise just get some distance so that it can throw potions of poison at you. As you can see, I've also made them very, very fast. They're about the same speed as evokers, and even beyond that, I've also made it so that they have a reduced movement efficiency. Or perhaps more accurately, their movement efficiency is less affected by being in things like water or cobwebs. This is especially relevant because this spawner here in the portal room will always be a witch spawner because it is the boss of the Swamp Stronghold and there's a lot of water in here. So this will allow them to, again, be able to run away from you, get some distance so they can throw more damaging potions at you more easily while you are hampered among the water or need to hop over the lily pads and stuff. Oh, now I've lost track of her. Where did she go? I've also added wall decoration variants for the zombie, bogged, and slime trial spawners so that they can generate within the walls of the maze. This is important because in order to make sure that the staircase spawning is kept consistent, I've had to make it so that the exterior portion of the maze cannot have any trial spawners, at least not the ones that are embedded in the floor like here. And so to help make up for this and maintain some combat as you explore the maze, these jigsaw blocks that generate the wall decorations in the exterior hallways of each of the mazes will have a chance to spawn spawners rather than the normal decorations. However, the ones in here will not be able to generate spawners since there's already a spawner that could generate here so that you don't get inundated with like 3 spawners all in one tight quarters. I've also added wall decorations for each of the vaults so that you can find this loot more frequently as you explore the mazes as well. Now, with so many trial spawners having the potential to generate in these mazes, and with so many mobs, especially during ominous trials, having a chance to give you poison, it's reasonable to be concerned that the difficulty here might be a little bit too high. And so to help with this, I've revisited the cauldron that we already had down here on this wall decoration and given it some additional functionality. As you can see, it is emitting some purple witch particles to help make it stand out and point out that there might be something special going on with it. And that something special is, if you get close to it while you have the poison effect, it will cure that poison effect, and the water level inside of the cauldron will go down. If the cauldron is empty, it won't be able to cure you at all. I'm going to make it so that these cauldron wall decorations spawn more commonly than most of the others, so that if you do end up in a situation where you're cornered by several of the swamp zombies or something, then you have a greater opportunity to find that cure and rely on it. You just don't want to stand too close or you'll use up all that water. And hopefully that'll help alleviate the difficulty added by this venomous enchantment. Now, of course, I wouldn't add this custom enchantment and keep it all to myself, so the venomous enchantment can be on enchanted books and enchanted pieces of weaponry that you can find inside any biome stronghold, not just the swamp. If this is something you're interested in, I might consider adding more custom enchantments that are unique to the various biome strongholds to reward you even further for exploring them and collecting the loot, so you get those unique enchantments that you won't be able to find in an enchanting table. So now we have loot as well as spawners of varying kinds that can help populate the mazes in particular. But of course, these are also integral to making sure that the rooms that we build will have things to populate them as well. So let's get working on a few of those. It was a little harder to come up with ideas for the rooms for this biome, but I'm pretty happy with the design for a lot of these. I won't go over all of them, but let's talk about some of the favorites. Of course, I've mentioned before that I've found it's really important to have a room that is dedicated to having vaults in it. Even though vaults can appear as random loot throughout the complexes, by having a room that is dedicated to them, it helps ensure that the player will be able to have a reliable place to find them so they can use all the trial keys they've collected. We have 2 normal ones here, and then in this back room hidden behind this wall, there is an ominous vault as well. That's hopefully going to be pretty obvious and given away by these stairs here. This one actually required me to change the code a little bit for one of the traps that I already had used in some of the other strongholds. Under these copper grates, I have the chiseled tough bricks, which, if you're familiar with Biome Stronghold, you know in this case are actually noxious gas emitters that activate when you stand near them. Previously, they would deactivate if there's a solid block over them, but I've made it so that exposed copper grates and copper grates period don't count as solid blocks. So when you stand on top of them, they will give you poison, and when you're just nearby, they'll emit these poison-like particles to kind of warn you that you're in danger. And these are scattered all throughout this room, which is not exactly a maze, but there are 2 kind of routes here that are of, I think, equivalent difficulty to get back to where there is some guaranteed loot. But there may be some trial spawners as well that you'll have to deal with on the way. And since it's likely you're going to get a lot of poison here, I've added a cauldron at the front of the room so that you can cure yourself either from the mobs or from the traps. This is one of the rooms that is geared much more towards the Mushroom Fields biome since the stronghold can generate there. The floor is mycelium completely instead of mud, although a processor is going to replace some of it with mud, but no water like before. Quite a lot of the mushrooms are of course going to get replaced with air, and this is also much more of like a smaller type of maze that's going to be filled with some trial spawners and loot at the end of some of these hallways. I've also added a cauldron at the front of this room, and this is something that's probably going to be a common practice through a lot of these rooms. If not built directly into the room, then having a jigsaw that can guarantee to place one of these cauldrons as one of the wall decorations. One thing I try to keep consistent between all of the biomes is having a room that is designed like a prison, since the prison hallway is an important feature, one of the only really prominent features of the vanilla stronghold, so it's something that I want to keep consistent throughout all of these. This one has these cells here along the side, including 2 large ones, and then this tower in the middle has a ladder inside as well as a lever to open the door that goes up to this sort of panopticon situation, where the wall decorations are, including one that is guaranteed to have a cauldron. And then this one I mostly just thought was really fun. Since slimes are of course a strongly associated mob with swamps, we have some slime kind of dripping down along the walls here on the top and the bottom. And the idea here is that you start up on this raised platform and you can jump down onto the slime blocks to then get propelled up onto this platform that's going to have some loot. But of course, if you miss, or if you just want to travel down the ladder here, then there will be some spawners as well as a couple of wall decorations, one of which is going to be a guaranteed cauldron. And then we just have some small simple rooms that'll probably mostly come up when there isn't room for any of the other ones that are a little bit larger. One that has a spawner, one that has loot, and one that just has a cauldron. Again, just to make sure these are relatively accessible throughout the stronghold. We have a good variety of rooms now, however, there isn't necessarily a lot of places for them to generate, at least not as many as some of the previous strongholds have had. The complexes that we have back here don't have a whole lot of extra entrances and exits that aren't being used for potential entrances into that particular complex, large rooms, or the path to the portal room. So of course, even though we're getting those side path complexes, that means that those side path complexes also don't have a whole ton of potential entrances that could be used for rooms. So we don't have a whole bunch of places for the rooms to generate. So I think we'll call this the small and the medium complex, which means it's time to build some larger complexes. Before that though, I want to talk a little bit about some of the remaining biomes that will eventually get strongholds. If you weren't already aware, viewers like you can vote on which biome I make a stronghold for next, and that's how the Swamp Stronghold and all the previous ones have been selected following the desert. However, in the last poll, the swamp won by an absolute landslide, and it was clear from the comments that it was primarily probably due to the fact that you guys didn't fully understand or appreciate what the other two options could bring to the table. So I really quickly want to give you a rundown of my general thoughts and ideas for what the remaining biome strongholds will approximately look like, so that you guys can make an educated and informed vote. For the Plains Biome Stronghold, I was thinking of going somewhat towards a Trail Ruins type of design. Even though Trail Ruins don't generate in Plains, I still think it's a really interesting and fun block palette and a unique kind of design that it lends itself to compared to some of the other strongholds. Probably I would still use mud bricks, but they would be much reduced compared to the Swamp Stronghold especially, and also even probably compared to their usage here. We'd use them primarily as a trim, perhaps even the floor, and most of the walls would take more advantage of these terracottas and things. I know a lot of people were suggesting that the Plains Biome Stronghold should be a direct update to the Vanilla Stronghold, but I think it's important to remember that the goal is that all of these strongholds are direct updates to the Vanilla Stronghold. The goal is that eventually the Vanilla Stronghold will not spawn at all. And so I think it's important that the Plains biome is still interesting. Just because Plains has the word plain in the name doesn't mean it has to be boring or simple. Some other biomes I've seen a lot of suggestions for are the Dark Forest and the Pale Garden biomes. And for those, I just have to say kind of a similar deal with the Mushroom Fields biome. These are both just single biomes that are, especially for the Pale Garden, just too small and too rare. Players would probably never find strongholds from those biomes. So the Pale Garden and the Dark Forest are actually getting roped along with all of the other forest-like biomes to have the Forest Biome Stronghold within them. Birch forests, oak forests, cherry blossom groves, all of these are going to have the Forest Stronghold in them, and the Forest Stronghold is going to be designed to have elements of all of these forests, all of these wood types. It's possible in the future that these will be split up, and the Dark Forest and Pale Garden, for example, might get their own stronghold that's just the two of them. But right now, I think they best belong grouped with all the rest of the forest to really ensure that players are going to be able to find, hopefully, all of the biome strongholds within any single given world. And then the last biome that I'll talk about here is the Savanna biome. Savannas currently don't have a super great block palette that lends itself to a stronghold. The acacia wood is obviously very stark, but a stronghold made of wood is not going to be particularly strong, and especially resilient against the lava that it's likely to encounter and intersect underground. And unlike with the Trail Ruins, we don't have a structure to kind of look to for that block palette suggestion other than the Savanna Village, which again just primarily uses the acacia wood. I think some of these buildings and these columns do use orange and yellow terracotta, and so that's something to consider. But I'm thinking for the Savanna Stronghold, I'll probably need to be a lot more creative about the block palette and the design that I'm going for. Right now, I'm thinking something along the lines of like a mechanical or steampunk kind of design, not too dissimilar to the Trial Chamber, though of course I don't want to just replicate the Trial Chamber block palette because that is very specific to that structure, and I want these biome strongholds to stand out. Now, these are not the last 3 biome strongholds that I'll ever create. Once we have those, that should cover all of the biome groups that I currently have things split up into, so the Vanilla Stronghold will no longer spawn. But there certainly are ways to break those groups up even further and add more biome strongholds that are slightly more specific, as long as, again, we're trying to make sure that every biome stronghold could be found in any given world. At least as close as we can, anyway. So right now there isn't a specific river biome stronghold, it's grouped with the plains, but potentially down the line that's something that we could look at. So if you have suggestions for more specific biome strongholds, don't feel discouraged about leaving those in the comments as well. I'm happy to listen and consider what is going to expand this pack and add even more variety to following your Eyes of Ender. Oh yes, these are huge. Obviously, it was very easy to put these together because just like with the small and medium complexes, these are just the same maze template stacked on top of each other. But of course, I've added the staircases between each of the layers like with the medium one. So like most of the biome strongholds, the swamp has a small, medium, and large complex, but it also has this extra large complex. This is about the same size as the Jungle Stronghold large complex, although of course that one is a lot more complicated with all of its interconnected rooms. Still, I hope I'm going to be really happy with the way that these mazes end up interconnecting with each other from layer to layer. For the large complex, we have 2 staircases going from the top layer and then a single staircase that goes from the middle layer to the bottom to mirror the medium complex. The extra large complex follows a similar pattern. We have a single staircase that goes up from the lowest layer, and then 2 staircases up from there, then 3 that go up to the very top layer. And each of these have even more entrances and exits compared to the medium complex, as well as to one another. The extra large complex has more than the large complex. So the hope is that this is going to allow for more spawning spaces for all the rooms that we've created. Now for the large and extra large complexes, I've only made 2 different jigsaw variations compared to the 3 that the small and medium had, just to help alleviate some of the difficulties in learning the navigation that come with it being so much larger. Remember, the idea is a good player that is able to pay attention and is trying to pay attention to where, for example, the staircases are relative to the connections in and out of these complexes, will be able to learn each of the variations. And so because these 2 are much larger and have more connections, having fewer variations of them should help make that a little bit of a simpler process, but still difficult unless you're making an actual effort. And of course, for each of them, we have the side path variation that is only going to be used for those side path complexes. So let's give these large and extra large complexes, as well as the new room designs, a try. Whoa, wow. Yeah, this is quite large. Oh my gosh. I did make the extra large complex have a higher chance of spawning as the first complex, which it appears to have done because the starting staircase is right there. And I also made it have an increased chance of spawning for the side path complexes like over here, but it has a reduced chance of spawning for the other main path complexes. But it is still able to spawn along that main path, which is what it did here, and is part of why this got so absolutely huge. We have the end portal here branching off from that main path complex as intended, but then we have another side path complex down here. There's one branching off over this way. This one made a side path complex over here, so it ended up being quite large. I'd estimate that this size is pretty comparable to the Jungle Stronghold, and I'd even argue that the Jungle Stronghold was much more difficult to navigate because of the interlocking rooms, whereas this is much more clear with all the different layers of mazes. You can tell them apart very easily, and you can tell, hope is, each complex apart very easily. Even though there's a lot of ground to cover, the actual separation by individual structure pieces is relatively small. All the mazes just happen to be really big on the X and Z axis. And really, there's nothing stopping the player from breaking through these walls, if only to get an idea of where they are in the maze, but of course they could also just go across if they happen to come across a dead end and get connected to a different hallway, a different part of the maze. But I think that's enough talking about the complexes. We do still have the portal room generating, so all is well there. Let's check on some of these other rooms. Definitely getting a lot of these dome ones. It might be worth reducing their weights a little bit. But we can come inside here and see the connection to the maze is pretty smooth, pretty fluid, just like with the portal room. And this is meant to be sort of like a stonemason or brickmason's workshop. It makes sense why it would be so common, but right now, probably a little bit too common. We do have a crypt generating down here that we can break into. The sarcophagi in here are laid with bricks, and if you choose to desecrate this tomb, there is some treasure in these chests. Walking through this maze, this mushroom farm room I think looks really nice, and again we have this pretty fluid connection with the maze itself. Not a whole lot to do in here, just more connection to the mushroom fields, but of course there is a spawner which is worth fighting to get some renewable loot. I gave this Witch's Brewery a little bit smaller of a doorway here to better fit with the circular design of the room, and it's always going to have a witch spawner in it, much like the portal room. Walking through this maze, I realized that we haven't actually checked if the vault and spawner wall decorations are generating correctly, but we clearly do have a vault here, so that is good. We can probably come around here to the outer section of this maze and see if we find any wall spawners. There is one right here coming up from this staircase, so that's nice, but then as soon as you turn in, we have a regular floor spawner because this is not on the exterior part of the maze complex. So we certainly have some weights to adjust, but I'm pretty happy with all these additions we've made and how they've come together. So let's get to work on those library rooms. If you've been following the Biome Stronghold series, then you know that I don't always make library rooms for all of these strongholds. I typically call them large rooms. However, for this one, I have decided to include a library. Whether or not one of the large rooms is a library room tends to just be based on whether I think I can make a library and bookshelves in particular work in that biome, and I think I was able to get it pretty nice here. I've gone with a sort of flooded library situation, so the floor is water just like the portal room, and we have lily pads and things. Lots of cobwebs in front of the bookshelves, some of which are a little bit more decorated. We've got these nice shelves with the mangrove slabs and stairs that are hiding the actual bookshelf blocks behind them. But this is not where you enter the room. You actually enter it up here, where there's a little bit of a landing or scaffolding that has the hallway from which you will connect to the maze. Whichever one doesn't get selected will generate a room. This large room also has 2 guaranteed cauldrons, one up here and then one on the lower floor, because you're going to need it when you're fighting the witches in particular down here. The library is one of 6 large rooms that I've designed for this biome stronghold, which makes it, I believe, the stronghold that has the most different types of large rooms. So I'll just run through them a little bit quickly. This is the mausoleum room. It's designed to look sort of like an underground graveyard. We've got these nice headstones here that are going to have spawners and lots of loot around in this central area, and then this back mausoleum section will be guarded by a witch spawner, and there will be some guaranteed treasure loot in here. This chest has the library loot table, which means it is always going to include the eye armor trim. This next room is based on a suggestion from Liperio, a user in my Discord server, which you can join with the link in the description. They suggested a failed portal room, but I've gone ahead and just made more of a fake or infected portal room. So once again, we have mycelium and lots of mushrooms to have that mushroom field connection, and instead of the large mangrove trees, or rather small mangrove trees, we have these huge mushrooms growing out of the water. But there are no ender frames underneath the mushroom stems. And of course, the typical end portal shape is made of obsidian rather than bedrock. So this isn't a functioning portal room, it's not pretending to be a functional portal room, but it should get the player excited for finding the real portal room. All of the other trappings of the portal room are here, so there will be some loot up on these upper platforms, as well as a spawner up here, a witch spawner in the water down on the ground, and this chest does have the library loot table as well. All of the biome strongholds feature a treasure room that is just like this, very standardized, but with a block palette that matches that particular biome, and it just has a bunch of loot and one of the boss spawners, in this case a witch. And then similarly, all of the biome strongholds feature a sleeping quarters that is intended to be relatively safe, a place to sleep and set your respawn point, inspired by the bed chamber that is inside of trial chambers. And then I wanted to do something kind of cool and fun for this final large room. So this is intended to be like a summoning circle. To really connect to the witches in a unique kind of way, we have this circle made of candles with a sigil made of redstone dust that is lit by these redstone torches here. And in the middle, we have a unique spawner. This trial spawner doesn't appear anywhere else in the stronghold, and it's going to spawn a scaled up and increased difficulty Zoglin, but it's going to have some increased loot drops as well. With the addition of this Zoglin trial spawner, I would say that I have finally succeeded in updating the mechanics for the Swamp Stronghold. Before we test that all of these large rooms generate correctly, there is one more complex that I need to build. In order to guarantee that every stronghold includes exactly one end portal room, most of the biome strongholds have taken advantage of what I call a portal complex. This is typically just a version of the large complex, a variant if you will, that has the portal room built into it. In this case, it is down here in the back of this lower and some of the middle section of what is otherwise a large complex. Now, in order to do this, I did have to build some of the mazes directly into this first piece of the complex that generates. So the first and second layer of the portal complex are always going to have the same maze design, only the top layer is going to be randomized based on the mazes that we have back there. Of course, the contents within that are still going to have the random decorations and spawners and things thanks to these jigsaw blocks, but it's important that they are hard-coded basically into the structure, if you will, so that the connection to the portal room and the portal room itself can generate just fine as well. Having a portal complex not only helps ensure that every stronghold will have a portal room, but it also helps add some additional complications to the otherwise learnable navigation. If you enter a complex that appears to be a large complex, such as through one of the top layers, but even through the lower or middle layer, then you might have to check it fully in order to ensure that it isn't the portal complex, or to check if it is. And then if it's not, then you know that you can move on to some of the adjoining complexes and see if either they are a portal complex or they connect to the portal room. So now that we have this to really solidify that the structure's generation is sound, and we have the large rooms that will add some just additional loot and value and reward to exploring all of the extremities of all of the complexes, let's test everything that we have built so far. I'll probably do a couple of test generations like this, but it is reassuring to see that from the starting staircase we go into a large complex here, and then the main path ultimately does lead to a regular portal room. At least I'm pretty sure that's regular. I suppose it could be fake. Nope, this one does happen to be real. Good. Let's fly around and see if we can't find any more. Looks like this is a library room actually, so we can check that. It is generating another normal room, which is cool to see. But coming in here, we have the wall decorations generating bright. There's a guaranteed cauldron over here. We've got a spawner here and there to kind of flank us as we either go into this room or take the staircase down to the lower section of the library. Directly below us, we've got the witch spawner, but there is some guaranteed loot back here, as well as the cauldron to help protect us. And of course, I'm using a processor to remove some of the cobwebs along with the lily pads. We have a summoning circle large room down here that we can break into. And it is nice to see that by and large, the processor that changes some of the mud to water isn't interfering too much with the sigil here. We do have one broken line right here, but that's really not that big a deal. And if anything, it adds some extra character to this really cool large room. We have another library room up here. No fake portals. I did make those have a little bit lower weights, possibly worth increasing that, but it does look like those are all the large rooms that we happen to get for this particular stronghold. Every complex has a guaranteed chance to attempt to spawn one of them if there's going to be enough room, but because other structure pieces can get in the way, it can mean that some complexes won't have a large room attached. And I think that's okay because we're still getting plenty of them. If anything, this just helps to replicate the normal behavior of library rooms that vanilla strongholds have, that we didn't make an explicit effort to recreate, but is still somewhat represented here. I do want to try generating a couple more tests and see if we can't get a portal complex to generate too. This one's an extra large complex, and it looks like it does lead into a regular portal room. We do have some other large rooms like the mausoleum down there, which we can go check out real quick. Things are looking pretty nice in here, a lot more kind of chaotic with the processor having been applied. But we are getting these spawners here in the middle. This happens to be a pretty challenging room, it looks like. These two spawners aren't guaranteed to spawn, but they certainly can, and they certainly did, along with the witch spawner that is, of course, guaranteed. This stronghold did get a fake portal room. Let's hop in here and see how the processor ends up looking. I included a processor in here to make some of the large mushroom blocks be shroom lights to add a little bit of lighting in here, a little bit of variety, but everything else in here looks like it's generating just as we would expect based on the regular portal room. And speaking of which, let's see if we can find it. Feeling pretty good that it's going to be a portal complex. No, just another regular portal room. I mean, it is reassuring that these are generating so consistently, but I really would like to make sure that that portal complex is generating too. Okay, here we go. This one ended up being just absolutely massive. Looks like we have an extra large complex that goes into a small one that then goes down into a portal complex, which we can tell because the portal room is right there. There is, or at least can be, a bit of a tell for identifying whether the exit from a complex is on the main path, but I'll leave that for you to kind of decipher and figure out. Again, part of that learnable navigation. I'll also refresh you on how the custom end portal mechanic actually works. I've placed a marker entity in the middle of the bedrock frame here, as well as at the positions of each of these end portal frames. When you put an Eye of Ender in an end portal frame, the marker in the middle of the bedrock frame is going to say, hey, there's an Eye of Ender here in this portal frame, so I'm going to start projecting particles from there to myself. Let's go ahead and get these filled up real quick. This is what it looks like when you've placed 11 Eyes of Ender in the portal frames, which again can generate with Eyes of Ender already inside of them. When the player places the last Eye of Ender into the end portal frame, it's going to wait a few seconds and then spawn the end portal with this awesome particle effect. All of the purple particles will stop generating, all the markers get killed, and you're just left with the end portal for you to travel to. At this point, I would say that the Swamp Stronghold is complete. If you've enjoyed the video, please remember to like and subscribe, and keep an eye out for more Biome Strongholds, custom structure, and World Gen related content. As one final reminder, the Biome Strongholds data pack is available to play for free on Modrinth, Planet Minecraft, and Smith. You can find the link for that in the description. The Swamp Stronghold will be available in early access to my Patreon supporters at Wizard tier and higher. If you want to learn to make custom structures like this, check the link in the description for my written guide. Custom World Gen and Jigsaw structures can be some of the hardest parts of data packs to get into, but I've tried to make it as easy as possible with a very thorough documentation of what to expect and how to do all the various things that you would expect to be able to do. Thanks for watching!